All right. First of all, is your background. Where are you from? Where are you born?
I was born in Brooklyn in 1932, and I stayed there for my first 17 years. When I went off to Schenectady to college for 3 years, and then off to Syracuse for medical school for 4 years.
Okay. What was it like living through the Great Depression, which was your childhood, and then living through World War II?
I was pretty much protected from the hardships of the Depression. I mean, my folks didn't have an awful lot of money, but I didn't know. They didn't say, "Hey, you can't do this and do that." They just were very sympathetic when I wanted something they couldn't afford.
What is it that your father did?
My
Do?
father had a newspaper stand, and he sold newspapers, candy, and cigarettes and comic books.
And how did that work out for him during the Great Depression and then World War II as a business
Well,
owner?
during the Depression and World War II, people certainly wanted to know what was going on. So they would buy newspapers. Uh, Cigarettes, they very often would have my father break open the pack, and they would buy one or two at a time. My father would bring home comic books to me, I would read them, and he would take them back so he could sell them.
All right. So, having lived through World War II and the Great Depression, did any of that color or influence your decisions on what to do as a business owner or to go into business?
No, actually, uh, my father, when I was 5 or 6, said to me, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to be a pilot." And
Okay, go ahead. You said to your father,
I want to be a pilot. He said, "No, you're not going to be a pilot. You're going to be a doctor." And from then on, everything was tilted toward going into medicine.
you were drafted during the Korean War, but due to already being accepted to medical school, you wound up serving after the conflict because you had gotten your medical training, which was more beneficial to the Army. How did any of this, the war, being in Korea, being drafted, affect your any of your experiences in Korea with the PX or any of that, or the people in Korea? Any of that have an effect on going into business or how you conducted business? Or
Well, I was a senior officer for a unit, a battle group actually it was called, and then I had to assign duties, and we used to order medicines. So that, in a sense, was a little bit of a prelude to go into private practice.
when you decided to go into practice, did your father give you any business advice when you decided to start up a business?
Actually, no. I guess my father always figured if you're in medicine, you're always going to do well. He didn't know that it isn't always like that.
Did you ever seek advice from him on business matters? I mean,
Actually, no. Interestingly enough, no.
how did you know you wanted to open a practice or join a practice as opposed to just being hospital staff?
Well, I wanted to be on my own. If a hospital staff, you're working for the hospital, you're an employee. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be my own boss.
Were there any startup costs to joining the practice you wound up joining?
Well, actually, initially, no, because I went in with two other guys who were already in an established practice. But after 2 years, we decided to build our own office building, and that involved me coughing up a fair amount of money.
Did you have the money?
Well, I had been in the service and I had been in practice here for 2 years, so I had some money accumulated.
What was the startup cost for the three of you? Do you remember?
It was $96,000.
What was the year?
It was the second year, 1964.
Were there any issues you encountered from a business perspective of starting up your practice?
Well, it's like any business, you have to have an attraction so people will come, and that was my senior partner who was well known in the community, and you have to have good location. And we were on a main thoroughfare, and we were near an exit off of the 287th Expressway.
So there was no advertising cost involved. It was word of mouth.
No,
One of the issues with running a business, of course, when you're running it and you have employees and partners, is theft. Did you ever have any issues with theft?
I had a problem with one of my partners. It was minor theft in a sense, but it was theft. We each would submit the cost of our gasoline.
This was when?
This is in the 64, 65.
Okay.
And we just assumed that whatever we ran up in costs was pretty fairly evenly divided. Turns out one of my partners had filled up twice at the same gas pump in the same day. So it was obvious to me that he was filling up for his wife. So I called him on that.
How'd you catch him? How'd you find out this was going on?
Oh, I used to look at all the expenses, and the gasoline expenses was one of the things I followed. If you're in business, you have to follow your expenses.
Did you ever get audited by the IRS?
Yes, I got audited once. It was a terrible thing. It took a whole week, and he sat in the office. I didn't realize he really wasn't working on our audit, but he was doing his own business. But anyhow, turns out when we gave the girls their Christmas bonus, we did not take out for Social Security. So they picked us up on that. So he spent a whole week questioning us, looking at our books, and it cost us $90 in fines.
How many staff members? There were the three of you who were the managing partners that were all the physicians. How many support staff did you have?
We had 10 girls working for us.
And what did they all do the same job?
Well, for each physician, there was a girl who was his unique person. So she would make sure all his appointments were set.
Okay, camera's rolling. So you said for the three physicians you had
10. We had one person who was an office manager and checked to make sure that the insurance receipts matched what we billed the insurance company. And we had one person who was a lab technician. The other 8 people took care of the individual doctors. They would put the patients in, they would make sure his schedule was proper, that they would give him some coffee.
Who did the bookkeeping?
I had a person who was a real bookkeeper. I mean, she'd been a bookkeeper in business.
Did you ever have to replace staff? Did you ever have issues with turnover?
I certainly had one person who, she was very nice, very personable, but she would try to talk people out from coming to be seen. And I fired her.
First of all, how did it fall on your shoulders?
It sort of devolved upon me as being part of the office manager.
Do you remember what you said to her?
I don't remember except just saying, I said, "You're out, go."
You had to replace the 2 partners you joined with. Was that of their decision or yours?
Well, that was their decision in the sense they retired.
And how did you replace them? Meaning, did you have a set of interview questions or a model for how to find if the replacements were the right people for your practice, your partnership?
Yeah, well, there were people always who were looking for a job would contact us. So if I had somebody who contacted us and I knew who was recommending him, then I would interview. I'd take him out to supper actually, and interview him and his wife because if you can't stand his wife, the practice will never survive.
How'd you know that?
One of those things you
Okay, so you were in this practice for 42 years. How'd you know it was time to go?
46.
Even better. How'd you know it was time to go?
Well, actually, there was a minor difference. I wanted to cut down, and my partners didn't want me to cut down, and I was burnt out. And I started seeing people and saying to myself, "Gee, I've seen this a million times." Then I knew it was time to go.
Was there what did it cost them to get you out? Was there a buyout on their
Oh
part?
yes, and they had to pay me for my share of the accounts receivable and my share of the cost of the building and the land.
Was there an exit strategy? I mean, did you really think this through or you just decided?
Oh, we this was all written up by a lawyer long before I retired.
So your lawyer just managed all of the paperwork. And
Yes.
three final questions. First of all, from a business perspective, do you have any regrets, anything you wish you'd done differently in business?
No, I mean it was a successful business, and actually I enjoyed working, and that was the important part.
Do you have a proudest moment, proudest memory?
I think I had a child who was in coma, diabetic coma, and the treatment required more medicine than usual, and I pulled her through. And it turned out, in addition to diabetes, she also had hyperthyroidism, a very unusual situation.
What about the story of the kid who you checked that had the pain in the neck and the headache, and you tapped him, and then you called your partner?
Oh, I had this kid who had a high fever and a stiff neck, and I thought he had meningitis. I did a spinal tap and it was completely clear. But I decided to treat him anyway as meningitis. I called my partner, and he told me, do that and then re-tap him in the morning, which I did, and that showed the germ that he had, and it was obviously meningitis. He recovered, except when he came to, he was completely deaf.
Did you feel any connection because that's what your older brother had passed away from?
No.
Last question. Do you have any advice to others from a business perspective about becoming an entrepreneur or starting a business?
Make sure you have enough cash to fall back on when times are bad. Pick your areas carefully and pick your partners even more carefully.